Tell me when you're ready, and I'll take it from there.
You bet. You can go ahead.
Okay. Um, so how many folks are we talking with? About seven?
There's three of us at the hall here, and there is four other people joining us online.
Okay. Um, so I wanted to have this as interactive as possible, and additionally, I'd also will take this any direction people want to go in, so we can cover any topic you have questions on. You could throw this into the chat. Somebody there can just say, "Hey, I have a question," whatever technology allows. What I've prepared for us today is a little bit of the holistic financial planning module. Usually we teach this in about 12 hours. Maybe if you're on your game, you can get down to 6, so we're clearly not going to do that in 90 minutes. So my hope was when I was speaking with Tina and Carla that I have at the end of this presentation some names in the Alberta area of people that could give you further, more in-depth, and maybe in-person training. So if nothing else, I would like you to get some ideas about what it is that you want to further your education on in the off season, and to just seed your mind with different ways of organizing your business, strategically. So with no further ado, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Seth Wilner. I work for the University of New Hampshire. We do not have the weather you all have, but it's 10 below zero, and we're due to get about 8 inches of snow, and so everyone's closing down here, which is kind of neat. I've been working with farmers for about 20 years. I've been teaching this holistic financial planning for about 12 years now, and it's really been quite impactful, and we'll cover some content. Um, Here we go. Okay. Uh, Holistic Management International is the kind of the mother organization that helped refine this process. And Don Campbell, I believe in Saskatchewan, uh, also has been really instrumental in driving this process home into kind of like 9 steps. So I want to credit those people. The way that this strategic business planning works is kind of these 9 steps you see. We're going to go through those more in depth. I think chunking those out to 9 steps makes it kind of methodical, and so hence you can wrap your head around it. As important as the process is, the conversations that this is really going to invoke are going to be equally as important as number crunching and whatnot. I at least certainly find that with the farm families I work with around financial management and strategic planning. This really catalyzes those type of conversations. Um, okay, the traditional method that we kind of look at, strategic business planning is we have income minus expenses equal profit. What we did with the holistic financial planning is really just turn that on its head, and we say income minus profit equals expenses. Talk to me about what difference you think that makes when you see the inverted equation here. You can type, you can maybe Carla can summarize your thoughts. What do you think the difference is?
Would this show you your margins more?
Nope, not. It wouldn't show your margins here.
Ted says it ensures you get some income.
Right. How does it do that? That's the key. Ted nailed it.
See how fast you can type.
Yeah, exactly.
See what you want, or
Is that what you?
set what you want from your business.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It does a couple things, and one, it tells you right up front, here's what I need for profit for my business. So you project your revenues. Now you know what you need to take out of the business. So the second thing that does is it really gives you a hard cap for your expenses. So as opposed to the more passive model where you take your income, you subtract your expenses, and when you get left over at the end, you get left over. That's your profit. Usually, it's not always the rosiest picture. This says nope. we're actually going to limit our expenses. So that's a real powerful. There's a story. We had late blight, which attacks both tomatoes and potatoes, amongst other things, and it was really taking out the tomato crop, which is a real profitable crop in our neck of the woods. And so there were farmers that were just spraying fungicides because late blight's a fungus. And I said to them, I was like, at what point do you think you're losing money? Why not just let the crop grow? And they didn't really have an idea of that. And their response was, this is what it takes to grow the crop, and we're going to do it. That is more from that production model. Here's our income we project from tomatoes, the expenses, we'll know at the end of the year what the total expenses were, and hopefully it was profitable. And that model doesn't seem to work, at least in our neck of the woods, in our Northeast agricultural region anymore. It did in the yesteryear. It was that you could raise your crop, a quality crop, quality livestock, sell it at prevailing market prices, and do okay. And now we really have to ramp up the business aspect of our farming model. And so that second equation, income minus profit, again, as Ted said, yeah, here's what I know that we need to take out of the farm for our family or for a variety of other things we'll see. And now I know what all my expenses need to be. So now what do you think that does for the expense side of the equation? How do you cut your expenses? This question's to all of you.
I'm thinking you can't hear my brain turning though.
That's okay. Yeah.
Welcome to GoToMeeting.
Ted, do you have the answer for us on this one?
Blake says, you mean other than economy of scale? Ted says no.
Yeah. And I'm not even so much thinking economy of scale, although that will come into play. What this really says is, okay, I have to limit my expenses. If I'm going to limit my expenses, I'm going to have to prioritize them. And so here's what the model lets us do for prioritizing expenses. It says not all my expenses are equal. So now I want to really now differentiate my expenses. Some of them are going to be top priority investments. So I'm going to spend money to make money. Fencing is an example of how I can get more out of my swards, and by fencing them in, by doing some high density grazing practices. Irrigation systems is another priority investment that you can get more out of cropland, fruits, vegetables. So it definitely takes money to make money. Then there's your common everyday expenses. And then finally, there are those expenses we can call liability expenses, or another phrase from this model in yesteryear was inescapable. You have things like workman's compensation, taxes, lease fees, those type of things. You can't really play with those all that much. So the idea that I try and tell people are, I'm holding up 3 highlighters, we'll call them pink, blue, and yellow for all intents and purposes. I'm going to take those liability expenses or those inescapable expenses. They're going to be maybe 7 in a fiscal year. I'm going to highlight those blue. Not really a lot I can do with those. Then I'm going to take all my other expenses and I'm going to try and differentiate between those that are going to make me money, and we'll kind of go through that shortly, and those that are just kind of my everyday expenses, fuel, building maintenance, so on and so forth. And it's going to be those I'm going to try and target to cut, since again, I want to cap my expenses so I can be assured of the profit I need. So that's the mindset. If you walk away with nothing else from today, that mindset of setting the profit level you need, capping your expenses, and differentiating your expenses so you can cut those maintenance expenses, that will be pretty key. Any questions on that before we go on? Any opinions on that? Comments?
Ted added on there, how do you deal with investments that last more than 1 year?
So investments that last more than 1 year, I'm going to do both a financial plan, and then at some point in this process, you'll see we're going to also do cash projections. So if I set out and buy a $40,000 tractor, then I'm going to just take an annual amortized figure and use that in my annual plan. So if that tractor is due to last 10 years, likely to last longer, let's just say 10 years, that would be $4,000 a year I'd put in my financial plan. When I do cash flow, though, I'm going to certainly have to say I actually expended the $40,000 if I paid cash for it. If not, I'm going to just use the loan figure that I have to pay, the principal and the interest. So that's how I would deal with long-term investments. And you're going to have to be making long-term investments for sure. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, we'll keep going then. Okay, so this is again just driving home a point that we're really trying to switch a mindset from production, where I'm really looking at, pounds per acre, bales per acre, weaning weight, those type of things. And now instead I'm really going to shift to a profit, dollars per acre, dollars per head, those type of things. And so if we shift that focus, it's going to help us manage our business differently. And so it's certainly going to help manage the business, we'll see shortly, in choosing our enterprises. There's a lot of folks here that will just run enterprises and offer things that they believe their customers want, and they haven't fully even performed a cost of production. And so sweet corn is a good example here. Sweet corn in my county ranges between $3.50 and $9 a dozen, and yet there wasn't a farmer in my county that knew what it cost per dozen. The average yield on sweet corn is about 700 dozen per acre. So if it costs you $7 per dozen and you're selling it at $5 per dozen, you're taking a $2 per dozen loss. That's $1,400 per acre that you could be losing by not knowing your cost of production. Customers want it, it sells out, so farmers like it sells, we're going to produce it. And then they go to make decisions of, should I double my acreage because I don't have enough sweet corn to keep up with demand? And so if you are in a production mindset, you double the acreage and you sell everything. If you are in a profit mindset, you say, I'm losing $2 a dozen. Either I raise my price, or no, I'm going to either buy it in, or I'm simply not going to offer it. And so there are those farmers that really buy into that right away. There are those that say, well, it's a loss leader and I can sell more profitable crops such as winter squash. Those profitable crops are going to have to carry the loss of the loss leader crops, and rarely do I see those profitable crops carrying their own profit margin and making up for the loss of the non-profitable enterprises. This really kind of helps that business mindset of saying, we're not going to carry non-profitable crops. For those people that have heard of Richard Wiswall, he's a Vermont farmer. He has a book. It's called the Organic Farmer Business Management Handbook. I don't know why it says the Organic Farmer's Business Management Handbook, because it's really just about business management. Doesn't matter production method, but it's a really good book. His name is Richard and Wiswall, Wiswall, and he has a CD in the back of the book that also has some enterprise budgets. He really is against the loss leader model, but the idea really being that profit versus production mindset. Okay.
Seth,
As we go through this,
sorry, can I
yes,
interrupt
please.
you for half a second?
Oh, please.
Your box that has your control panel and stuff in it is over the PowerPoint presentation just a little bit.
Aha.
Slide one over. I was trying to figure out what it was, and then I finally figured. There we go. It's over. It's over just a tiny bit now, but that's good. It was just blocking a little bit.
Perfect.
I couldn't figure if it was on our end or your end, but I got it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. By all means, everyone just chime in and say, okay, move this along more, or we get it, or slow down and back up. If this is really your class, and I'm just here to kind of facilitate as best I could. This slide is going to make no other point that you all, if you've been farming for a year or more, let alone obviously 5 or more years, you have some process you use for your business planning. Let this enhance that process and augment it. Don't throw that process away. If you have no process, this is a good one. There was a question that just came up. How do you something? I missed it.
How do you know who to put on your team?
That's a good question. That's going to come down to a lot of your values. So Sometimes on your team, it's going to be you as the owner. Sometimes on your team, it's going to be you and your family members, and you can decide if your kids are, old enough and desirable enough to be on your management team. Sometimes that your management team is going to be key managers. You might have a production manager, you might have a marketing manager, those type of people. Usually the team is internal in that manner, like it's the farm workers. Rarely have I seen a team that has external people, such as veterinarians or extension staff or others, but it really could be anybody. Some people say, well, the bankers or lenders should be on the team. One, I don't know that they even want to be, and two, you're really going to be looking at some, you know, figures that are personal and confidential. You're going to be making some decisions. You're going to be really looking at the values you want to run your business. So oftentimes, majority of times, it is an internal team and nobody external. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Yep. And there was another comment about the book. Was that?
Oh, I just put in there that there's a good book. It's called Good to Great.
Oh, okay.
And it talks about getting the right people together on your team before you implement a plan, because the people involved are the key to your success.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then having a process. This next process is really good about the team as well. So the annual review. Um, this step I think is really pretty important, particularly in looking at that point about having the right conversations. So effectively at the end of your fiscal year, which most of ours are January or December 31st, we try and take a look back at last year and we say, okay, at a 10,000 foot view, was there anything really holding our farm or ranch operations back? Was there a single thing that really, put a wrench in the works? And
Ted,
so,
sorry, Ted wanted to know if you could go back to the 9 steps for a second. I think that was
oh
your
yeah,
slide.
absolutely.
There we go.
Yeah. And we'll see this at the end of each step, so it'll be a good reminder.
Good.
All right, so that next step is then going to be that annual review, and here's what it really is talking about. You're really looking for two things in the annual review. You're looking to have conversations with that management team. If you're ultimately going to have a decision-making team that's going to be, farm family only, husband, wife, kids, that's it. You at least on this step would also probably like more voices in there, managers, maybe some key employees that have been with you for a while, and you want their opinion in their eyes. What across our farm, or our ranch really held us back? Constant equipment breakdown, constant turnover of labor, poor communication, a great deal of conflict that was just depleting and wearing people down, um, weed problems, drought. I mean, things that affect all enterprises, not specific to any one single enterprise, but really impacting all enterprises. Fencing breaking down, lack of water, things to that effect. So given that introduction, what are some things that you might think would be log jams using this phraseology in your experience farming?
The one I see in succession is um, sometimes with a lack of succession plan. Um,
Okay, lack of succession plan.
someone having that control over things that are going on and not letting the younger generation come in and have some of that control. Ted also added in here poor communication, which is a great one.
Mhm.
And
And Blake,
go
oh,
ahead.
go.
Blake added in the animal processing.
Mhm. Yeah, and so the animal processing is a tough one. I know that we worked with our Department of Ag and Farm Bureau, and we were able to really lobby hard and get 3 slaughter facilities in the last decade to come into the tri-state region, and that's been really helpful. But lack of processing was pretty key. Communication is something. In a way, it's a good problem to have because the solutions are fairly cheap. So when we deal with communication problems on the farm, we look at variety of mechanisms that have worked. A Monday morning meeting that is strictly 15 minutes, that's it. an agenda, rotating facilitators, so that power and control is shared, and it's really a planning for the week. Friday afternoon meeting about equal in length, looking at what wasn't accomplished, other communication things that have worked, whiteboards in the barns, um, walkie-talkies, some of cell phones that have texting capacity, but identifying communication and what's going on and why oftentimes can have some affordable solutions. But it's great to know. Communication also sometimes goes into power and control. We've had those issues where lack of transparency, lack of sharing of financial data, so people couldn't make informed decisions. Those have also been some log jams that we've faced. The idea, as you can see from this slide, though, is that any solution to your logjam is going to be a wonderful return on any investment made. So that has to be a key priority expense, and one that you're going to work like a dog not to cut when you start cutting the other expenses. Remember, you're going to cap your expenses, and so those key priority investments are going to be so important to realize. So we highly recommend that you use, I mean, you can buy these sheets from Holistic Management International, or you can take a notebook piece of paper and write top priority investment. And if you write your logjam down, you brainstorm with your management team all possible solutions, and you might even break and research some of these solutions from other neighboring farms, internet, whatever have you, then come back and select one and cost that out. That would be a good use of income. Good use of money. So that is the single biggest thing across your operations, called the logjam. Same exact concept, though, goes to the adverse factors. You simply say, well, okay, that was the number one thing really hammering us. Were there any other problems, issues across the whole farm as well, or across the whole ranch? And that would be another good use of money to solve that. Sometimes it's a lack of education, and it's really investing in knowledge, education, those type of things. Lack of reliable laborers, as you can see up there. Poor soils, erosion, need for more land, neighbor relations, those type of things.
Ted had a good one he added on here, allowing our business to overpower your quality of life, like weekends.
Oh, that's huge. That is huge. Business to overpower your quality of life. Um, One of the things we've really taught a lot of beginning women farmers. That's where the grant money was. So we wrote a bunch of grants, and it's been a program about 5 years trying to farm with children. That was quite something. Um, and yeah, that is a big issue, quality of life. And one of the things, obviously, that if you want to really try and preserve a quality of life, is to define what makes a good quality of life. Downtime, time with family, um, being in good physical and emotional health, those type of things. But that's really key. Obviously, identifying those what you want is key to actually realizing it. Is that something that people are familiar with? And is a goal setting process where they really identify, you know, value statements, quality of life statements, and then put some things, some systems or policies or infrastructure to achieve that? People have any experience with that?
We do at West Central because we do quite a bit of work around values and how we set up our organization, the programs we're doing around those values.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure at a farm level, probably people that have done holistic management would have a lot more experience than people outside of the program.
Anybody in our audience have a whole farm goal that really is value driven?
Ted says needs to go
Yeah.
forward and complete that for myself. It's been a few years since I seriously did it.
It's amazing when you see it on paper how some decisions just jump off the page. Is fairly easy. I know that we switched on our farm. We totally took onions out of production. It just became such a time sink at the time when other crops were really needing attention. And so it was working constantly. And we substituted onions for garlic. We ended up making more money on garlic, having way more time, since garlic predominantly is planted in mid-October. Uh, and then not much is done to it until you have to do a spring fertilization prior to any of your other crops being ready, and then selling some garlic scapes and then harvesting it in July. And it and time was the limiting factor, and it was knowing that time with family and some downtime was a real important value, and really looking at what was taking the majority of our time up. And then you looked at the enterprises that were the time sinks. And you said, okay, what can we find other substitutes for that made money? And so just having that, if you don't take the time to do that, though, you really are. It makes the decision making much more difficult. Okay, so that's often you simply revert to, yeah, survival mode, exactly as Frank says. He said oftentimes you simply revert to survival mode, and you do, which is why now is the planning season. So 40 below, you're not going out for the full day. You might be going out for a half day of chores. Come in and try and do that planning when you're not under the gun. But when you are under the gun and you need 28 hours in a day and you need 8 days in a week, you're right. You're surviving, and that's farming. So now it's time to do it.
And the other comment that was on there was about um, somebody having one, but it's on the mantelpiece. It's hard to keep in the center of decision making.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple more comments on there. How many knee-jerk reactions will lead you to a successful business?
Yeah.
And thank God for seasonality.
Yeah. And so the knee-jerk reactions, if you get lucky and by the grace of God, then you can have a successful business. But it's you're relinquishing control in that way. And then yes, seasonality is key because now is a time you could think for sure. And the mantelpiece is really interesting. You could argue that there's a spectrum, right? That there's a kind of a line that at the far end it's limited value, and on the right hand side it's exceptional value or very valuable. Just going through the process and making up a whole farm goal has value because it at least at that point in time has the conversations and captures the quality of life you want. And then if it just sits on the shelf, okay, that was a good exercise. It's not going to be so useful. But if that then really moves forward into really driving your decision making and driving your planning, it just gains just exponentially more value to getting the quality of life in a profitable business. All right, so that is step one in this process. You're really taking a look back at last year and you're saying, across our whole farm, not enterprise by enterprise, but across the whole farm, 10,000-foot view, what were our major problems that we don't want to repeat next year? And then what are the solutions? And let's cost those out, and those are going to be top priority investments. And those are going to be like usually the multi-year investment. I say usually because if communication is your logjam, that's we've solved that problem on farms for $100 and under. And so, but then there's the big ones of having a piece of equipment that you can't afford really to replace, that you've been duct taping and band-aiding for years on end, and it's really going to actually pay dividends to buy a new piece of equipment. Here is the assess starting net worth, the next phase. Don Campbell, I don't know if anybody knows Don Campbell, he's the one that really drove this home. Effectively what it's really inviting you all to do is doing a balance sheet at the beginning of your fiscal year and saying, okay, let's look at our assets and let's look at our liabilities. If you look at this balance sheet, it's really kind of a net worth statement. Most balance sheets are going to have short-term, less than 12 months that you're going to use up an asset, a liability less than 12 months till you exhaust that liability, and they're going to have an intermediate asset, and that's going to be 1 to 7 years, and then long-term assets and long-term liabilities. They break it down and adds complexity. There's a reason for it. That's great. Your lender might force you to do it. You might find value in doing it. You might find value at least in saying, here's a short term, less than a year, assets and liabilities, and everything else we'll count long term. Or you might just say, here's what I have, here's what I own, and if I had to have a fire sale tomorrow, if I had to sell it, liquidate everything tomorrow, here's what I could get for market value. Be sure that if you do market value that you don't just say, well, my acre of land jumped up from being, 25,000 an acre to, 40,000 acre and I look a lot more profitable. I have a greater net worth. At least try and keep that fairly steady. But the idea is start out with identifying what your assets and liabilities are and to give a value, a market value. You could give a book value, what you paid for it, minus depreciation, divided by its usable life. We won't get into all those equations, but the idea here being trying to at least get a net worth. Is this clear? This can be confusing to people, and I'm teaching it via a web thousands of miles away. So are there questions on this step?
Nope, nothing coming in.
Very good. Okay. So when we look at increasing net worth, which is what we want to do with this plan, we can increase. So what the point of this slide is it goes well beyond a simply cash on hand or cash in a bank account. So that might be obvious to you, but that is confusing at times to producers we work with. So if you reduce your liabilities by paying off your debts and loans, you've increased your net worth. If you take assets and you subtract liabilities for net worth, if that liabilities number goes lower, your net worth went up. Likewise, if your assets went up, you have more cattle, you have more equipment, you have more land, more supplies or inventory, then your net worth goes up, and it goes beyond simple cash on hand. So that's just the point of this slide.
There's a
And that's
question about what about separating the land out as a separate enterprise?
so the land is going to be a farm asset, and we're going to be looking at a whole farm planning here. So you could say, so we're not at, so when you do an enterprise analysis, which we're going to get to in planning the revenue, if you have 70 acres of land and 2 acres of that is used for your tomatoes, you would want to, put the value of the taxes or the lease of that 2 acres into the tomato enterprise as a cost. When we are just looking at the whole 70 acres of land, if that's what the farm is using as an asset, or you're combining both farm and family, the value of that land would be in there. Did that answer that question? So we're not looking at an enterprise by enterprise level. We're looking at all the farm assets and all the farm liabilities. All right,
He says, okay.
very good. Now we're planning the income. Okay, again, that whole farm goal in the jargon of holistic management, it's the holistic goal. But effectively, it's a goal that identifies the quality of life. How do I want my life to be like on this farm or this ranch? Why am I farming? What is important to me? What's important to me in life? What do I value? Those value statements and really, the voice of all the management team, that's going to be a pretty key tool in deciding what enterprises you're going to run. Again, it's a tool. It's not the end all be all. It is a tool. A gross profit analysis. So we're going to get into that a little bit, but you're going to project revenue from your enterprises, and then you're going to subtract out all the direct costs, all the costs directly associated with that seed, fertilizer, fuel, things of that effect. Those are the costs that actually vary with levels of production. The enterprise budgets are going to take it to the next level, and they're actually going to say, well, we're going to actually put in, the appropriate fixed costs, and we're going to proportion those. So we're going to apportion the fraction of the tractor we use, the fraction of the farmland, taxes, lease that we pay, fraction of salaried labor, those type of things. What we find is that oftentimes farmers that we work with, they don't, they get very intimidated by that and they don't do that. So at least we're saying do a gross profit analysis. Take your projected revenue from your enterprises and subtract out all the direct costs. So if you are ordering, I don't know, 10 ton of lime, and we are going to ask you to apportion out only the lime that's going to go on the tomato land, the hay land, whatever have you. Most people can get their head around that. A best guess is still fine. But so you'll take your projected revenue, you'll subtract out those direct costs, and that'll give you your gross margin. And so obviously if that's negative, that's saying that that enterprise, without any return to overhead, without any payment towards fixed costs at all, is losing you money, which by my way of thinking says you might as well sit on a couch and watch Oprah and burn your money, and you have less wear and tear on your body and mind and time. So at least your revenue should cover your direct costs. So if you take your revenue and subtract all those direct costs and it comes out to zero, you're returning nothing to your fixed costs. So in time, your farm or ranch will still be degraded. You won't be able to maintain your buildings, your equipment, so on and so forth. Like ideally, you'd be returning money. It would be profitable, be positive to your fixed costs. Okay, your dreams are another tool in trying to plan what enterprises you're going to do. And your passion and your skills, clearly if you play to your strengths, likely you're going to be more successful out the gate. And those are things that also match what your infrastructure and your existing resources are. And the idea there being, that's less investment you have to make. Any questions on that?
No, nothing coming up.
All right. Okay. So for when you plan, so now you're gonna really be looking at this. So clearly, your whole farm financial plan is going to be, enterprise A plus enterprise B plus enterprise C, so on and so forth, and all those, revenues and all those expenses. And ideally, they're all going to end up to yield you a profit. So we grow for high-end restaurants. We grow produce for high-end restaurants, and so we have I don't know, 20 different enterprises we run. We were at upwards of 42, and we cut those by half at a point in time, um, weeding out those that weren't profitable, or those that took too much time, or those that we simply hated. That's an idea, but you're gonna try and project your income again based on past history, or there's a lot of resources on the web on what the yield and what the prices will be. Farmers tend to share their prices, so I think if you have a good agriculture community where you are, you say, well, what do you get for a 40-pound bale of hay? What do you get for a round bale? What do you get for a pound of tomatoes? So on and so forth. That they will, the price can be, people will share their prices. Likewise, you can also go and research that easily. And then your own production system, you'll probably want to go on your average yield. Definitely not your best year. That would not be a good idea. You're not going to have your best year every year. If so, it would be average by definition. And if you use any electronic record keeping things, any spreadsheets that do this, and we have these free that we can send you, then it does pay to plug numbers in for your best year, your worst year, and your average year. Particularly, does your worst year really give you the income you need? And if not, how much under is it, and are you willing to take that chance? Likewise, as you're planning the income, will any off-farm income be used? We'll talk about planning profit shortly. But that's the idea in there. Any questions on that plan the income? We went through that somewhat quickly. Again, we usually devote 12 hours, and this is just kind of a primer. Seeing none, I'll go forward. All right, so planning the profit. Remember, we said that we're going to rearrange our equation to say income of all of our collected enterprises minus the profit we need. It's going to give us a dollar figure for our expenses. So how is it that you would determine the profit you would need? What are your ideas on that? You got to have input for me on this one.
Blake says 25%.
Okay. Who here thinks in terms of percent? Ted, Carla, others? Blake, me, nice. I figured because you put 25% in, so nice.
Eldon's with us. He says he likes to work with percentage.
Yeah. So excellent. I so then you would take your income, $100,000, 25K is going to be the profit you want out, and you got 75K for your expenses. Um, I don't think in terms of percentage. I try and think in terms and but I would say that a plurality of people do. What I do is I need a dollar figure in my head. So I say, okay, here's what my family needs to live off of. So for a family of four, for where I live, we did a family budget and we need about $53,000 per year net. That's what we need for the whole family. So I could then say, well, my wife earns 25. So now the farm has to earn $28,000 a year. Now I have an exact dollar figure that I can strive for. Ideally, I would actually, exceed that. But now I can say, whereas we went with $100,000 the farm earns, 25% is going to be that, the profit. So I got to take my 25K out. Now I got 75K for expenses. That would work. My way would work too. 100,000, I need 28,000. So now, I'm left with my, what is that? So $72,000 that I have for expenses. Either way, you want to get a kind of a dollar figure to cap your expenses. So when you plan your profit, you can say, here's the percent I want from my farm. You can say, here's the amount of money I need for family living, for college, for vacation for the family, whatever have you. But come up with some figure of doing it and whatever makes more sense to you. Um,
So there's a couple of questions here. Can you not factor that in as an expense, a salary for the farm?
you could factor that in as a fixed cost salary, um, and so then you would use what for your profit figure. I think of profit as money that's going to leave the farm. So depending on how you're set up, if you're a sole proprietor, farms are a pass through, and any money left over is effectively treated as a return to labor and management. If you're an LLC, it's return to shareholders, and then salaries certainly are viewed as a cost. But for my mind, I'm trying to put a cap on my expenses and being able to take money out of the farm to meet my family needs or my other needs. However that makes sense to you, um, by all means,
So
utilize that.
could it be like a disposable income beyond, like if you're paying yourself a full-time wage, could that be
Hmm.
disposable income?
Could be. So you're going to get a full-time wage. That's going to be one of the expenses that you take the income, you minus the profit, and that expense line has to cover all the direct costs plus your salary. And so what that profit then becomes is fund money, travel money, whatever have you. Sure.
Hmm. And then less.
I don't tend to do it that way, but okay.
Well, I was just thinking, and depending on
Mhm.
how much of your household expenses, like power or utilities, that you write off as part of the farm income, then that could potentially come off of what that income is, right? Like
Yep.
expected income.
That would be an expense, right? Your utilities, the fraction of the utilities that your farm uses versus the house, absolutely.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then the other
And so,
comment
oh,
too, just by a couple of the participants, was that just that wage, how comparable is that wage to what they would be earning off the farm? So if they had an off-farm job, so kind of keeping that in the
mhm.
back of your mind, and what your value is. Are your Is your time worth the same as an off-farm income or on-farm?
Yeah. Can profit be, yes, okay, so a comment on that, and then you'll be able to capture Blake's comment. We won't lose that.
Yeah,
Carla, is that right?
yeah, you bet.
All right, so what we were just speaking about with what could I be earning off farm is known in the economic world as opportunity cost. So if I look for a year's worth of labor, I got 28,000. If I worked at somebody else's farm, I could have 35,000 a year. If I worked at you know, this extension, I could have 43,000 a year. That's opportunity costs, and it's saying, okay, so Do I want to sacrifice this money to work on my farm? And there's where your values will come in. Or likewise, here's the money, here's the price I need to charge in order, because I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to say that I'm not going to take 28,000 when I could have another job for 34,000. I'm going to raise my prices so I profit 34,000. So those are those are decisions to be made, but that is saying, like, here's the opportunity cost of working at this farm on my own farm on my own land. I'm making less money, and is that satisfactory? And if it's not, maybe don't work on your own farm. Maybe raise your prices, um, or accept that. But that's where that's kind of that's those are some management decisions and how that's often handled. Um, then in terms of, can profit be used to invest in your farm? Yeah, profit can be used for anything. In theory, though, by the way that I look at it, and this is just one person's opinion, so form your own opinion by understanding the concept. If I take my income and I subtract off money I want to leave my farm and fund my life, then all my other expenses are going to stay in the farm. That is my reinvestment in a better walk-in cooler refrigerated system, a refrigerator truck, a trailer to take animals to slaughter, irrigation, fencing, all those infrastructure things, bonuses for staff, health insurance for employees, all those things all have to obviously fit in the expense. So that's why obviously the greater the money that's leaving your farm, the less money you're going to have for your expenses. So, but if you're saying, well, either I'm just going to take profit and use it to invest in employee health care or invest in irrigation or invest in so on and so forth, that's fine. You could also just play the game of taking far less profit and having greater expense to fund that. Either way, it becomes kind of a mathematical game. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what's the amount I need to remove from this farm for my quality of life and my family's, and then what budget does that give me? What cap on my expenses do I have to function in? So that's how I see that. Other questions before we move on?
No, we're
All
good.
right. So here, this points to just, Blake wanted a percent, Seth wanted a dollar figure. These are things that you might look at. The second one down here is this savings, this buffer. So with frequency, we have a farm that's profitable but doesn't cash flow well, meaning the income comes in at a point in time that leaves not enough funds to pay the expenses. This is very frequent on uh, on horticulture farms or on produce farms. So Mother's Day to Father's Day is the big day for ornamental horticulture, greenhouse operations, but the expenses are often incurred in February, March, and April. A lot of the same thing is with vegetable farms, particularly those that have heated greenhouses. Those expenses are incurred, in the winter, spring. Income doesn't come in until spring, summer, fall. Doesn't really, it's not really the case on a dairy farm, and it can be the case in livestock farms, just depending if you're buying in springers and selling those off in the fall. But the idea of this buffer savings is, instead of borrowing money at interest, you have a savings account that you borrow from and repay to cover cash flow expenses. The improved quality of life, that really is, here's your family expenses, what we need to feed, house, and clothe ourselves. This quality of life are vacations, college funds for your kids, education, meaning like conferences that you're going to go to build your farming skills, those type of things. These are just some examples of how you would use profit. Again, you can see this doesn't really have a lot of that investment in farm infrastructure. It's a kind of a different mindset, but use the mindset that works for you. So that was planning for profit. Questions on that? Okay, So now we have the income side we looked at by really trying to assess what enterprises we're going to run. Really looking at what is the cost of production, what's the profitability of our individual enterprises. That's the income side, the revenue. Subtract out a profit side. What do you need to take from the farm, or what percent do you of profitability do you want your farm to have? 20% breakthrough out there. Others have attempted for 50%, so on and so forth. Now we're going to go to the other side of the equation. So you have the equals expenses, and so now we're looking at the expense side. Okay. When If we took a piece of paper and we said top priority investments for the farm, which would be another way of saying expenses that I really want to be able to afford, that I want to prioritize. One, we said the solutions to those log jams and the solutions to adverse factors. Those are things, I look back last year, they were really hammering my farm across the board. I really want to invest in their solution. Now we're going to look at the individual enterprise level. We're going to say, okay, let's now dig down into the individual enterprise level. We're going to use this tool called the Financial Weak Link examination. Those that are familiar with holistic management, it's one of the testing questions. We try and break all of our enterprises into 3 different buckets. It doesn't so matter what bucket's what. So if you're like, oh, well, this was in the wrong bucket, that's not a big deal. Just having that mindset to say, is it a production issue? Meaning, am I able to take sunlight and convert that, sunlight or raw resources, and convert that into my product? So am I able to grow enough grass? Am I able to have good milk yield? Am I able to grow good apples? All the aspects of that production is that resource conversion. The next is product conversion for your products or your services. Are you able to take those apples, that milk, that forage, that flesh of your cow, and convert it into a product that's in saleable form? And then finally, is it or is it the marketing conversion? Is that the link of the chain that I really need to invest in? So if we look at this, we say to ourselves, given this 1 year, this financial planning year, I cannot invest in all my expenses. And likely you couldn't invest in all your expenses because you're looking to cut your expenses so you can extract more profit from your farm operation. So you said, what is my weakest link in each enterprise? And that is what I'm going to invest in this year. So if my yield per acre of apples is down, then I might really look at it and say, well, why is that? I'm getting hammered with pests. I don't have enough irrigation water. It's too droughty. Critters are getting it, deer, whatever have you. I'm not producing enough apples. I'm going to invest. I have a resource conversion weak link. I'm going to assess. I'm going to invest in things that will solve that. Again, brainstorm solutions, cost those out, and put that on the top priority investment sheet. My yields per acre are fabulous, average or above average, but I have apples that are falling from the tree, hitting the ground and rotting. I cannot get them picked, or I can get them picked, but I can't get them clean and sorted and bagged, or I have no ability to preserve them. I have no walk-in cooler space. That's a product conversion weak link. When somebody wrote, I think it was Ted, it might have been Blake though, about slaughter facilities or processing, that's a product conversion weak link. Get pigs, nice, exactly. So, but so that's an idea of a product conversion weak link. Or you might have great yield, you might have great ability to harvest, wash it, sort it, preserve it in the walk-in cooler, but you just have no market. This stuff is just stacking up in your warehouse or your walk-in coolers. Then you have a market conversion weak link. And the whole mentality is, I'm going to try and figure out what my weak link is per enterprise and invest in that this year. Can't invest in everything I want to this year, but each year I'm going to address the weak link, and that's going to become a top priority investment. And so that's the idea. Does that make sense to you? So that's a pretty potent concept too.
Would you spend some time examining as well what the causes are of those weak links as opposed to just a solution for fixing them, but what are those root causes? So whether going back
Hmm.
to, I think it was your number 2 slide was going back like to the logjam and what's causing the logjam, and whether that's something inherent in how you're operating, or is it something else can be fixed so that you get a good solution so it's not reoccurring?
Yeah, and so you're always gonna, that's an excellent question. You're always gonna, when you identify, here's my weak link, yeah, our yields are low. Or, boy, they say it should take 2 years to get to market weight, and I'm at, you know, coming close to 3 years. Or, boy, I have, and then you're gonna look at why. Why is that? And sometimes you're going to have to ask the question why 5 times. It's called peeling back the onion. You're really saying, well, why? And well, because we have worm problems. Why? Well, because our grazing practices, we our stubble height's too high, or we graze, or our stubble height's too low, and we graze too close to the ground. Why? Well, because we don't have enough forage. Why? So on and so forth. So it's exactly as you had said, Carla. You're going to identify what the weak link is, and then you're going to look for the root cause. If not, you're really investing money in symptoms, right? And symptoms are usually a short-term expensive fix that usually bites you in the backside in the long term. So then you're going to say, okay, here's the root cause why. Then you brainstorm solutions around that. And when you brainstorm your solutions, again, now you can look externally. You can look at extension, your veterinarian, any of your sales reps, your seed reps, those type of things. So those might be they can give you ideas. You brainstorm and cost those out, and that's what you're going to invest in. But exactly, why aren't people buying our product? And you might say, well, we might just need more radio ads. Well, try and ferret out why. Why don't you? Is it the quality of your product, and it's not really a marketing issue like you think? Is it that you're too far off the beaten path and you have to change market locations? Um, those type of things. Is that nobody wants what you're selling anymore, or the in our my neck of the woods, we have all these great raspberry farms, and in days gone by, people would pick flats at a time and freeze them. That's just not what people are doing anymore. So you can market all you want. Here, come pick these raspberries, and think, well, we just have to invest more in marketing. But to Carla's point, what's the root cause? And maybe you don't have a marketing conversion issue, and that's going to help you decide what your true um, issue is by knowing what the root cause is. Did that answer your question, Carla?
Absolutely. And it also links a little bit back to what Ted had said at the beginning was, how do you know which people to involve in your farm and in your process? And when you're
Yeah.
looking at your root causes, like you said, is your vet or your extension person, people like that, maybe those are some of those key people that are really going to help you be successful in your business. So it's a bit of a circle there of linking back what you're doing, the issues you're having, and the people that can be there to facilitate you to help strengthen your business plan.
Exactly. And that also really plays to the farm community. When we get people in a room, farmers in a room together, really bouncing off ideas, or when you're, eating breakfast at the Grange and saying, boy, this is my problem. What do you think? They have great ideas on how to solve them. So, um, yeah, absolutely. External people really help in identifying the root cause. Other questions on this weak link concept? Okay. Okay, so this is an idea of this resource conversion. Again, when we say top priority investments, here's where your solution, you're going to have identified the root causes we just talked about. Now you're brainstorming solutions, and then you're going to invest in these fences, irrigation system, water development, soil amendments potentially, labor. This is for a product conversion, preserve harvest. Um, I mean, the slaughter facilities, unfortunately, it's somewhat of an external solution, right? I mean, you're not just going to have a government-approved slaughterhouse that you can sell across. I know we go here on the county line and the state line, and so we have to have, a U.S. Department of Ag approved in order to sell across state lines. Um, I don't know what it is, the regulations in your neck of the woods are, but
We have the same
oftentimes
for out of province. We have the same thing. Yeah.
out of province, yeah. So you're not really going to just solve that on your own. So that becomes more difficult. Marketing conversion, websites, brochures, social media, those type of things. All right.
So I'm seeing a link here between every one of those is human capital and education. So intellectual capital are two that run through all three areas.
Seemingly does. And we have a big issue with farm labor where we are. The demographic, I mean, the average age of the farmer in New Hampshire is 57, and that's actually higher in my county. So younger farmers are not going into agriculture as much. So labor and turnover is a big issue. We were getting some real skilled labor from you know, migrant labor, people from Jamaica, people from other countries, and federal laws preclude that, make it, at least not preclude it, make it very much more difficult. And so that's become a real issue for growers. Average age in Canada is 55, so okay, yeah. So labor might be an issue where you are as well. All right, so now we're looking at prioritizing expenses at step 6. Um, I think we really talked about doing that analysis, prioritizing those, uh, and putting those down. So again, when you're now taking that whole, so you've gone through each of your enterprises, you've really looked at the weak link analysis, and you've come up with, this is the weak link in this enterprise, this is the root cause, and this is a solution of those options we looked at that we want to invest in. That would go on a top priority investment worksheet. If you had another piece of paper that you just labeled liabilities, those are, again, those things that you really don't have much play on in terms of cutting expenses. Workman's compensation insurance is my protection, and I can't dicker with the insurance and say, well, I'm going to only pay half of that or 80% of that. That's a bill. I have to pay it. Likewise with my taxes. Likewise, if I borrowed money from my folks, yeah, maybe I could renegotiate, but if I knew that was going to put them in a bad position, I'd be morally obligated not to. So there's some liabilities that, again, they usually number maybe 7, that you don't have much play in. So that's out, and then all your other expenses are just your maintenance expenses. And that doesn't mean that that you can just cut out your maintenance expenses. Maintenance expenses is just a category that says when I look to prioritize my expenses and cut some, that if I go to that category first, can I use less fuel? Can I use biodiesel and cut down on the amount of fuel I use? Can I change my production methods? Can I use perhaps less labor and have better technology? Can I lease a piece of equipment instead of buy it? These type of things you might be able to make cuts in. Obviously not cutting everything out, but the idea is you have a limited cap on your expenses, and ideally you'd really prioritize those top priority investments. That's the concept. I think these next several slides are going to really talk about that. Again, these are ideas of liability, loan interest. You sign the contract, you'll default if you don't pay the interest. So utilities, phone, repairs, even some of your living expenses, those are things you can cut down. I ask this question often. I say, how many people in this audience have a family budget that actually delineates expenses? Groceries, heat, clothing, so on and so forth. Usually I try and use some electronic poll tool so that people don't have to raise their hands and say I don't. But if you don't have a family budget, that is really going to help you to be able to reduce your living expenses. And so that's 2 that don't really have one. My dad actually in college, he paid me $20 a week if I wrote down everything I expended money on in the course of a week. And it was amazing, those little $2 and $4 items that added up. Milkshakes, I'm loath to admit at the time I smoked cigarettes, and cigarettes added up, milkshakes added up, gas added up. And when you looked at all that stuff, eating out added up. It was so easy to be able to cut things when I knew where it was going, particularly like the frivolous expenses. So family budget, particularly you want something to inform the profit you need to take out of your farm. So if you want to both reduce your living expense and know what your farm needs to provide for that living expense, a family budget is a great first step. Highly recommend it. All right. So those are the income by side of the equation. The profit, we said that percent or the fixed amount. The expenses, we prioritize the expenses and limit those. And so now we want to actually make sure that we can cash flow things. Smoke is investment being cool, which honors my quality of life statement. I definitely smoked to be cool, no question. I mean, I rode horses, and there wasn't a person that didn't ride that didn't smoke, but it's a costly way of being cool, and in the long run, you're taking years off your life, but choices definitely everyone wants to make. Here where I live, a pack of cigarettes is $7. I mean, that's amazing. $7. So say you're one pack a day, that's $50 a week almost. That's cash. That's net cash, $50 a week too. Anyhow, moving on. Um, so the cash forecast is really just what we spoke of. It's cash flow. It's trying to write down in each month when you're going to have expenses due and when you're going to have revenue coming in, and making sure that you have the revenue to cover your expenses, and if not, come up with a game plan. Where I am, we use operational loans frequently. Um, so for 5 to 7% you can borrow, and you have to pay that money back within a 12-month period or less. Um, you can do a long-term loan, line of credit, maybe a couple, 3 years. And again, we also suggest folks try and create a savings account over time where they lend it to themselves. What do you all do for cash flow?
I know there are quite a few producers in this area that do operational loans. It's pretty common practice. Blake says that he's using the community shared agriculture model, so the
Yeah, yep.
consumers are fronting some of that money and taking up a bit of the risk ahead of time for his operation. And
Bonds, okay. Yeah, that CSA model in my neck of the woods originally started with sharing the risk and also cash flowing, but it's evolved really only to a cash flow tool. So the people that give you their $450 for a share of vegetables for the summer expect it, and they're like, if you had a drought, they're like, yeah, okay, but I gave you 450. I know in theory I shared the risk, but I want my product or I'm unhappy. And so that's okay. It's evolved more into at least a cash flow tool and at least an idea on, how much quantity you need to plant. So it gives us kind of an intensity and a volume, but it does do well in cash flow. Another way people have kind of done it is do some break-even enterprises like Christmas trees, for example. Not all that profitable, but will bring in some cash in the December, when the whole vegetable and ornamental horticulture season is over. Those type of things are done. Um, Dairy farms have gone into some vegetables, low acreage vegetables, 5, 10 acres. That's helped them with cash forecast as well. But the idea then is you're all familiar with the idea of cash flow. Really figure out when your expenses and your income are coming in and leaving the farm, and being able to have a game plan for that. Okay. January, February, there you are. So balancing the plan is step 7 of 9, so that's great. What does that mean? Well, you're going to go and project your revenues, subtract your planned profit, and add up your expenses. And you're trying to whittle them down for sure, starting with the maintenance expenses, and see if it comes out to zero. And if it doesn't, you're going to look to do a couple of things. One, go back and cut more expenses. Again, the first kind of category of expenses you're going to look to cut are your maintenance expenses. Next, you're going to have to go into your top priority investments. Yeah, maybe that would be great to address that weak link in your apple crop this year and put that irrigation system in, but you just can't afford to do it. Maybe if you have 6 acres of apples, you can only irrigate 2, not the full 6. Same with, bird netting on blueberries. It's a big issue here. We lose about 40% of our crop to birds. So maybe instead of netting the whole 8 acres, you're going to net, an acre. Maybe you're not going to be able to net anything this year, but hopefully in future years you'll be able to. But that's the idea. Another way is to raise your prices and say, well, so I told you sweet corn got $3.50 to $9 a dozen. You were selling at $5.50. See if you can go up 50 cents or $1 a dozen, um, assuming, of course, it was profitable. Likely, you might say, well, this just doesn't balance, and so this is not bringing the money I need. I'm going to go back and revisit enterprises, and I'm going to put enterprises that have a greater margin, a greater profit margin on them. Or I'm going to get rid of enterprises that might also allow me to reduce capital assets. So I might be able to sell off a tractor, or I might be able to get rid of a greenhouse, or I might be able to simply not heat a greenhouse in the winter and, you know, come onto the market later with my produce, those type of things. Um, those are the ideas of trying to balance your plan. Increasing the amount of products you sell using more intense production methods might make it as well. Anyone ever played with any of that? Yep. Successfully? All right. What did you do? Used higher prices. Okay. Yep. I've not seen the resistance to higher prices that some people have feared. That with the loyal customer bases, explaining that costs have gone up, people were willing to pay more. I don't think necessarily many weren't even necessarily angry about it, and some weren't necessarily happy, but they knew their own heating oil was going up and their own fuel was going up and so on and so forth. So,
I'd have to agree
that,
with that as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the idea of balancing your plan, especially in the niche market. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think if you take the time to have the relationships, and I know Blake does this with his clients, and I raise sheep as well. If you take the time to explain to them, what the costs are and how they affect you, and also, especially in a niche market, if you're looking at environmental management, things like that, that you can really, explain to them and have them understand where you're coming from, and then they're not upset with paying that cost.
I agree. So those are the ideas behind balancing the plan. So now we'll go back to number 8, getting there. Okay. So I've had shareholder meetings where I've opened my book. Yeah, exactly. You share your numbers, and to the extent even if you share a bottom line, here's what it cost me on tomatoes. It does cost me $2.50 a pound. So and that's without paying myself anything. So I need $3 a pound. I'm like, all right, people will do that.
And I love Ted's comment, and I'd have to
Mm.
agree with this, as I've decided to be a price setter rather than a price taker. So it's about a change
Yes,
of mindset.
it's a huge change in mindset, and boy, just the paradigm changes make such a difference in how you run your business, which is what Wiswald argued in his book, and as does the holistic management for sure. Step 8 was the ending net worth. So on paper, you had your beginning net worth. You remember you had your assets, you had your liabilities, and that was your net worth. Okay, so that was before you made any plans. So now you're making these plans and you're saying, okay, well, it's a top priority investment to get a tractor, to get more cattle, to get more land, to have more fencing, to buy an irrigation system, to have a sprayer, to bring in more compost, whatever have you. Um, and so your assets have likely increased, or it might have been a top priority for you with your profit to pay down debt. So your liabilities could have decreased. And so the whole idea is that when you're done making this plan on paper, reassess your net worth. Now, the fiscal year hasn't gone by. This is just an an intellectual exercise, but did your net worth increase on paper at least? Um, and so that's pretty key. Now, if your net worth didn't increase on paper and it stayed the same, or maybe even got worse, how would you justify that? Out of curiosity, this is a question to the group. I couldn't have stumped you. Taking loans to build, right? So there's a variety of ways that your net worth could go down, but how would you justify that in your mind? You went through this planning process, and lo and behold, you added up, and your net worth went down. Would you just scrap that plan automatically, or is there a way that in your mind you could rationalize, well, this is a reason that I could accept it for?
Well, if you were looking at a longer term investment like equipment that
Mhm.
are going to help you make more money in the long run, or a handling facility that's going to change you or save you labor expenses, things like that, would those be examples?
Those could be examples. And then the example I was thinking went back with what Ted was saying earlier. If you're investing in your quality of life and it's reducing your net worth, like that might be something that's okay. Again, it becomes a personal decision. But th if your net worth is lower after you planned or stays the same, then oftentimes you want to go back and replan and look at different enterprises, or really look at how you might want to reduce liabilities, unless really it really pays off, and it's either going to make money in the future, like you were saying, like Blake was alluding to with loans, or if it was really going to improve your quality of life and be really impactful that way. So that's the idea, though. And that's the whole idea behind trying to do a beginning net worth as step two in the plan, and then an ending net worth. Then the final step of the plan is, let me see, uh, monitoring for results. So this is often at the Achilles heel of many folks, that so you have this roadmap of your plan, and then do you monitor if you're going to plan? So if you look and you monitor your plan, if you don't monitor your plan at all, so you look back and you say, boy, that's a bummer, last year didn't work out as I thought. Clearly the ability to make management choices is zero, right? Game over. You're just looking back at how the game went. If you monitor quarterly, depending on what commodities you produce, you might be able to make some management decisions. If you are if you're in Northeast agriculture and you are in fruit, vegetable, or even some of the livestock, then quarterly you're going to be hamstrung to be able to make any significant management decisions to really correct from plan deviation. So the idea is that you would likely monitor, ideally you'd monitor monthly. Within 10 days of the close of a month, if you could say our expenses were as projected, or our revenues were as projected, or our expenses were lower, or our revenues were higher, and you giddy up. If your expenses were higher or your revenues were lower, you're going to really want to try and make some management decisions as best you can um, during, in short order. Stop the bleeding, as it were. You might reduce wholesale accounts and funnel more into retail. You might raise prices. You might just call it a day on some enterprises. I gave you the example with tomatoes and late blight. But the idea is to really trying to monitor where your projected expenses and your projected income on target or better. And if not, really try and get to, as Carla said, what's the root cause of this? And then how do I really deal with this? We've had that issue with our apple crops. 3 of the last 5 years, we've had almost total crop loss. We had really warm springs, accelerated blossoming, and then we had frosts that were, in the 28 to 24-degree range, and when the flowers were really sensitive, and it just took out the apple crop. Obviously, they had to make some major management changes and decisions, or we had really reduced volume, and then we had to look at doing away with wholesale accounts, trying to get more agritourism in, raising the price, things to that effect. But that's the idea of the monitoring it.
So, Seth, this is a brilliant area of discussion. I was at the Canadian Forage and Grasslands conference last week, and Peggy Strankman had asked me that. Why is it that producers will not, go back and find out whether they're really making money or doing that evaluation? And so it's kind of a question I would pose to our participants too: is why are people not doing this? And I realize that even in business with nonprofits, there's things that are hard to measure, or like Ted had said about the time periods don't fit in ideally. So it can be a little bit tricky sometimes to figure out those numbers. But um, I guess it's just that mindset of why are people not doing it? Whether that's because they don't want to know that they're losing money, or and that's just an assumption on my behalf, but or is it because they don't understand how to do it? So I'm just wondering if any of the participants have any feedback on that. Or if you have any
Yeah.
any feedback you've got from people too.
Um, the record keeping seems to be the least desirable part of farming. So my producers tell me I got into farming because I wanted to raise livestock, or I wanted to grow vegetables, or I wanted to sell flowers and potted plants. And um, the record keeping is not something I enjoy. I force myself to do it. Um, uh, Not knowing is always a good excuse to allowing yourself to fail. Yeah, ignorance is bliss is one of the sayings that we have here. Um, and lacking know-how to have an efficient record-keeping system. We're teaching a lot of QuickBooks now. It's a great computer program, and it really lets you kind of get monthly reports to see if you're on or you're off. That's been really important. Sometimes it gets complex with those really multiple enterprises. And if you're selling livestock and hay and maybe corn silage, that's easier to track revenue per enterprise. If you're selling, potpourri of vegetables, that is more difficult to track. So some of it is know-how, some of it's lack of desire to do it, some of it's ignorance is bliss. Um, and so I think it also depends. I think farmers just starting out are more inclined to do it. And I think farmers that know that they won't be here next year at this point in time, if they don't, are more inclined to do it. I think people that are doing okay um, can afford somewhat not to. But clearly, if you have that profit mindset, this is the business aspect of farming, and it's just huge. Hard to train yourself to making new habits like keeping records. Yeah, it is hard. And that's where that next generation might be able to come on. They might, really get technology in a quick and easy manner. They might have a desire to look at the business aspect of it.
Do you think it would be beneficial for producers if it's something that they're not strong at or interested at to outsource that?
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know what it would cost to hire a bookkeeper. I would think it'd be beneficial to have bookkeeping services outsourced or analysis services outsourced. And I'd be hesitant to allow bill paying outsourced. That's where we've seen some farmers and ranchers get ripped off here. But absolutely, I would think that that would be a good use. And that's where it comes down to, like, what's the best use of your time? Can you pay someone $10 an hour to enter your data while you're out there making, driving tractor and producing, crop, and at $50 an hour worth of services? Then that'd be a no-brainer for me. Or if you just hate it and won't do it, and it's going to cost you profitability, that's a good investment by my way of thinking.
So that's something a good thing to keep in mind as well when you're looking at your log jams. Sometimes it's yourself.
Yeah, exactly though, right? No, no. Any other closing questions for folks? On the screen, you can see contacts in your area that can really help you. Education programs, one-on-one consulting, whatever have you. Don Campbell gave me these. I don't know Kelly or Brian, but so I
we've
can't
worked
speak to
with
them.
We've worked with Brian quite a bit. He
Nice.
lives down in the Rimby area, which is about an hour and a half south of us, and Kelly is about 2 hours east of us out of the Vermilion, Vegreville kind of area. So they're both very, very good with the holistic management program.
Nice. So that's all I have, but I can answer any questions you have or whatnot.
Good. If anyone has any questions, you can by all means post them in the chat or turn your mic on and ask them. I also wanted to add that one of the reasons we're having Seth come and talk about this is a bit of a precursor for the Holistic Management Conference, which is going to be held at Lloydminster February the 10th and 11th. So if you are interested in joining us for that, you can go onto our website at westcentralforge.com. And if you go bottom of the homepage, there's a link on there that you can register, or you can print off the agenda and the documents and whatnot and send it in via the mail.
Well, nice spending some time with all of you. Enjoy the winter. And however you want to do it, start planning in whatever way, shape, or form works for you. But anything's better than nothing by my way of thinking. So,
Great.
be well, all.